The Gullah Geechee. Are they Africans?
But guess what? We're the original Africans in the whole of the United States, period. It's right here.
Are they Indians?
I just never thought about the fact that
the indigenous Americans and the Africans combined.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are they a combination of Indians and Africans? Well, if they were part Indian, could you tell in today's time when there's ample amounts of African propaganda used to portray their cultural heritage? What are the names of the Indian tribes they mixed in with, and what were their practices?
We're here. We didn't go to Oklahoma. We stayed and fought. Many of my ancestors have died. We're still here.
Are the Indians that were on the same coast being erased in front of our eyes? Let's dive deep into the historic books and records to see what we can find about the so-called Gullah Geechee people.
I walk on Mona Kambaya Lele Kwambe. I walk on Mona Kambaya Lele Quaint. Has the will go see how you quenda ya. Has the will go dwell in the quaint. Has the will go see how you banga lily. Has the will go dwell in the quaint.
What is a Geechee? Well, Geechees come from the South Carolina area down to off the coast down to the St. Augustine, Florida area. So it's South Carolina and North Florida just along that coast. That's where you'll find the people who are known as Geechee people, who they're calling Gullah Geechee today. But those people get that name Geechee from the river called the Geechee River. Now that should be very obvious that these people get their name from the Geechee River, seeing as how the word Geechee is literally in the name of the river. Except for the word O, they pretty much have the exact name of the river. And the river has been there for over 13,500 years, being called the Geechee, the word meaning river of the Yuchis, based on certain sources. The Yuchis are Yuchi Indians. So the Geechee people are people who named themselves after a river which was termed after the Yuchi Indians. And when you look at the etymology of Geechee, it says it's from the Geechee River. And that also says it is from the river of the Yuchis, just like the Yuchi people. But when you look at today's definition, it tells you it's a dialect of an English words of African origins. And it also still says it's from people who settled in the Geechee River area. So they knew that these people came from the Geechee River, regardless. And also when you look at the Geechee River site, it tells you that Paleo-Indian societies lived here by the Geechee River over 11,500 years ago. These were settled by the Mississippians and the Yuchi Indians. Now, after they changed the name of the spelling to Yuchi with a Y and a CHI, it used to be spelled E-U-C-H-E-E. Now, that's very similar to Geechee, G-E-E-C-H-E-E. But some people would want you to think differently.
Then you had from the same region the Gidzi people, G-I-D-Z-I, which Geechee, which we spell now G-E-E-C-H-E-E, came out of.
Now, Queen Quet wants you to believe that Geechee did not come from the obvious Geechee River, as many sources will tell us. She wants you to believe that it comes from Gidzi, G-I-D-Z-I, some type of African tribe that they came up with later. Now, neither this word has the spelling nor pronunciation similar to Geechee, but they want you to believe that because they're trying to Africanize the name of the tribe.
Even the words Gullah and Geechee were close to the names of the ethnic groups found in Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia, the Gullah and the Geechee.
Now, the documentary that was shot prior wants you to believe that Geechee came from a completely different tribe. It says that it comes from the Keesee people or the Keesee area or an area called Geechee, which they now say Geechee people come from. I think they've just been trying to switch it over and over because they kind of messed up. And the problem with this is that that same information will get disseminated amongst the people themselves without any kind of backing.
So when you say Angola, that's the Gullah people. When you say Geechee, that's the Geechee people from that tribe. But you're talking about all of us coming together with all of our tongues to come up with a language that we can understand.
So notice that these people were given this information from a documentary. This is not a Geechee tribe that was passed down to them from oral tradition from their ancestors. They are repeating what the white people made in a documentary and not something that is facts passed down. Also notice that they're a little confused because she said that Gullah came from Angola, but they want you to believe it came from a Gullah tribe out of Sierra Leone. Knowing what a primary source is going to help you through this documentary, because it's going to take primary sources, things that you can read and see from the time that these people were here to their earliest times that we can find, that's going to help you figure out who these people are. What is a Geechee? What is a Gullah? One of the biggest talking points you'll hear these people say is that the Gullah Geechee have preserved most of the Africanisms within their culture because they were not in the normal slavery conditions. Now, this information was passed down from one particular person who was the first person to coin the phrase.
The Gullahs have been able to preserve more of their African cultural and language heritage than any other group of African Americans, really because of climate and geography.
Joseph Opala. Joseph Opala is the one that actually came up with this phrase. Now, nobody actually tries to fact check this man to see exactly what was the reason he came up with for why Gullah Geechee people have the most African traditions within their culture. But when you listen to what he says, it really has nothing to do with anything ancestral or cultural. It's all about some mosquitoes and a diseased environment.
The Gullahs have been able to preserve more of their African cultural and language heritage than any other group of African Americans, really because of climate and geography. The same conditions that made South Carolina, or coastal South Carolina and Georgia, an excellent place for rice cultivation, also made it an excellent place for the spread of tropical diseases brought from Africa. Although the rice cultivation was extremely lucrative from the standpoint of the white masters, it also made the disease environment, made it impossible for the Europeans to live there and prosper in large numbers. This was the only area where black people, African slaves, were often the overseers and the farm managers, simply because white people could not live in what was essentially an Africanized environment.
While the whites abandoned the low country because of their health, many blacks, refusing to bear the burden of slavery, also fled.
So they want you to believe that because the environment in South Carolina was so full of diseases from mosquitoes that only Africans could stay there and the white people had to stay away, so they were able to preserve their African culture based upon that so-called fact. But isn't it funny? Wasn't it the white people that were the ones that brought diseases when they first came upon the shores? Aren't they the ones that spread smallpox and other diseases? Well, that's funny.
Gullah is the most authentic African culture in America. We think Gullah came from the word Gola.
Gullah Geechee culture and heritage are contemporary. They're not from some 200 or 800 years ago. Our talk, our beliefs, our practices, they are the same as they were years ago. And they all emanate from our West African heritage. And I want people to know that.
People protect culture by passing it down.
This is my culture and this is my home.
Pete Wilson was born and raised on Georgia's Sapelo Island. He's Gullah Geechee, an ethnic group from coastal Georgia, Florida, and the Carolinas. They've passed down more of their African culture than any other black community in the U.S. Slavery stifled most others.
But guess what? We're the original Africans in the whole of the United States, period. It's right here. West Ashley, Charlestown.
They say that Gullah Geechee people culture has retained more of its Africanness than any other subset of African Americans.
As Sun explained, the Gullah people were generally brought to Charleston and then enslaved on isolated islands where they developed a unique culture and language. Today, they exist throughout the Carolina and Georgia coast, including Charleston, although ever fewer can afford to live in the city.
You see, when Joseph Opala says the talking point, that's all he has to do is put it out there. Everybody else starts to repeat it ad nauseum. See, these things need to be fact-checked, and they need to be fact-checked via primary sources. Primary sources is what's going to allow us to learn the truth about who these people are. And the reason why that's important is because if you were to stick to modern day sources, then you're only going to get modern day answers. And that's not going to tell you the truth from the people themselves directly, or from people who were there with the people themselves directly. Any kind of eyewitness or direct notes or information or newspaper clippings from the people who were there at the time. That's how you're going to be able to figure out what a Geechee is, what a Gullah is, what a Gullah Geechee is. As we stated before, when you look at the etymology of Geechee, it still references the Old Geechee River, as well as the definition references the river. But even when you go looking in the newspapers, like you have this thing calling a person a Geechee nigger in 1904. You also have things referencing Geechee or Ogeechee oyster farmers. So they knew that these people came from the Ogeechee River. Same thing here, Geechee or Ogeechee niggers. So as they're talking about them, they call them that. Even in this 1950 yearbook that I found called the Geechee, because that was the mascot, you look here and it shows a 16th century drawing of a Ogeechee Indian referencing the Ogeechee River with the Geechees, as well as calling them Indians. So these people, whoever they knew that these people were Geechee Indians, knew that they were Indians, and they came from the Ogeechee River. Other things show Geechee nigger with the Ogeechee swamps. You got people saying that Geechee was buried by the count and a big country buries big Geechee. These people were known as Geechees at some point in time. And moving forward in 1902 in the newspapers, you see this right here. Another person saying Big Geechee as a Negro, a Geechee Joe. He's calling himself a Geechee. That's his name, or a Geechee Charlie. That's a certain type of naming structure that they would call themselves. Geechee Joe, Geechee Charlie. It was normal because these people were Ogeechee River settled Indians. Now, what is a Gullah? Now, Gullah has a couple of different things. Now, some people will tell you that Gullah comes from the people from Angola that were brought over here as and called them Gullahs. So it's the word Angola without the an, just Gola, but kind of spelled differently with a U, LLAH instead of an OLA. Looking into the newspapers, you'll see back in the day that these Gullah people were listed, and they actually said they were bringing in some Gullah Negroes at one point in time. You only find a few references to that, but even in here, you'll have a thing that references the Gullah country off the classic soil of Africa, referencing Gullah as an actual place, not a tribe or a people, right? And even in here, it says a corpse of Gullah or Angola Negroes. Even further letting you know Gullah is used as a landmass. But even in the etymology of the word Gullah, other than it saying it being some type of language, it would tell you it's of uncertain origins, and it still references a shortening of Angola. Looking even further into the newspaper, you see Gullah country, a Negro fellow from the Gullah country, referencing a landmass. You also got here where it says a Gullah nigger, named Cudjo, and it's starting to make fun of the way the person talks. E say e king, I say e lazy, things of that nature. You'll find a lot of this in the newspaper. They're making fun of what they call Gullah speak. Like this, it says King Oba e country, or who been tell Gullah Sam to come in here yesterday. These are ways that they made fun of the people. That's him, why you no talk, nigger. That's the way they made fun of you when they referenced you as a Gullah, not Geechee.
Gullah, which we spell today G-U-L-L-A-H, was actually from the Gullah people, G-O-L-A, which came from the Rice Coast or Windward Coast region of West Africa, as we once called it, Al-Kebula. And they were some of the rice cultivators that were brought in to harvest Carolina gold rice.
So Queen Quet wants you to believe that Gullah does not come from the landmass called Angola, as we've seen. She wants you to believe that it comes from a tribe that is called the Gullah tribe that lives in Sierra Leone. In my own opinion, they're trying to change the origin of the Geechee people to the Gullah, Sierra Leone area because they don't want to have to explain why there is no Portuguese influence in the way these people speak or their behaviors, because the Portuguese have been in the Angola area since the 1500s. Now, that's the similar kind of thing with Ogeechee, right? Ogeechee should be the name of the Geechee people, spelled after the actual river over there that's been there for 13,500 years. But yet in other sources, they'll tell you that the Geechee people get their names from African tribes way across the Atlantic. They'll tell you that the word Geechee comes from Gidzi, Gidzi, or Kissi, Kissi. These people who come from that region of Sierra Leone and the Liberia area. But yet the Gullah people were known in many sources to come from Angola. That's the whole reason for them calling them Gullahs. Now, another thing is that the Gullah word comes from Guale, or the Wale Indians, spelled Guale. And those people had a language called Guale. It was actually a language, but they were called Guale Indians at some point as well.
This region bound by the Santilla or Santilla River up to the Ogeechee River here. So this area here we call Wale. Sometimes we call it Wale territory. I'll probably refer to it as Wale territory. The Spanish documents always call it La Lengua de Wale. In other words, the tongue. This is a place where people speak the same language. And just south of that, and the reason I show it is it will become important in this 400-year-old murder mystery as I reconstruct it. The boundary at this river here, just south of that, this is modern-day Cumberland Island, place that the Spanish had established a mission called San Pedro. And this particular island will play an important role in the uprising story. It's important to remember that that island's inhabitants were not Wale. They were, for lack of a better term, Mokama Timucua, or coastal Timucua. The problem with that term is Timucua in the 16th century is one specific village. It's not a group of people. They never collectively refer to themselves as Timucua.
And you have references to the Guale still out there. The Tolomato Indians were Wale refugees fleeing attacks on their mission villages in South Georgia. So this information is still out there. The Wale Indians were well known to the historians. Coming into the letter of Hernando de Soto from 1512, you have the information about the Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón expedition. It says the auditor Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón left there with vessels, and this is in the South Carolina region. It says to see the river and land of Santa Elena. 7 leagues to the north of these is a town which, instead of pronouncing it Oritza, they who went there called it Chicora, and as the other town for Wale, they said Waldape. Waldape is San Miguel Waldape. So that is the same area called McIntosh County in Georgia today. Now, McIntosh County is the same area where you'll see the Gullah Geechee corridor is situated in. And they'll say this is the first time that Africans set foot on these shores, which is a lie. But this is also a story of William McIntosh. The actual landmass is named after William McIntosh, McIntosh County. But this is a guy who was a Creek Indian chief who was killed because he signed a treaty against the Chief Indians. Looking back into more primary sources, you're going to see differently. You'll see here that in the Book of America in 1671, it's going to talk about the Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón expedition. Now, this is going to say differently than African slaves. But after this, Florida remained not unvisited for 8 years after the aforementioned voyage. Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón weighed anchor with 2 ships from Hispaniola to fetch slaves from the adjacent islands for the gold mines, which the labor the natives were not able to perform. Therefore, steering his course northwardly, he sailed along the coast of Chicora and Waldape, by them called Cabo de St. Helena. So this is Lucas Vasquez bringing Indian slaves from the islands to the mainland. Now, Guale very much so also looks like Gullah. So, and both were looked at as a language. Gullah's language was looked at more so to make fun of the people, whereas Guale was an actual real language spoken amongst the Indian tribes who lived in this same exact area before they said some Africans came in and took it over. And these people would literally make songs about you. They would call it the Gullah chant. And they would use the Gullah dialect in order to try to make some type of funny song or some stand-up comedy. These people would literally use the word Gullah to make fun of you.
Hubble Buzzard lost a feather on his head. Akbar Rabbit ride the fox to the party and do him so mean. The fox say if he ever could have get a hand on top of Rabbit, he'd have gone and kill him.
Yes, these people were literally making fun of you when they called you a Gullah. They termed the words that you spoke a broken English patois or a Gullah or a African type of speak, saying it was undiscernible. This is how they made fun of you with the word Gullah. And they made fun of you in the newspapers. Family or no family, they no family oh mine, it says here. Them Gullah nigger, nothing to tell. He could not speak intelligible English. He spoke the Gullah dialect of the coast, which cannot be comprehended by any outsider, or the Gullah nigger talk, as they called it, and here as the broken Gullah English. And just to jump to the point, Gullah and Geechee were never used together ever. You never seen those words together on any documents until around the late 1940s. About close to 1950, after Lorenzo Dal Turner does his Africanisms in the Gullah dialect book. Now, this is when they're purposely trying to tie together this African connection and attaching the word Gullah, which in many cases meant Angola people, and I'll show that in documents. They're trying to attach that along with the Geechee to attach the African to it. Eventually, over time, they're going to try to drop that Geechee. We'll talk about that later. But eventually, over time, you'll drop the Geechee and you'll be left with Gullah. And you got a lot of people today that just call themselves Gullah. They don't even say the word Geechee. Whereas when we look into the sources, we're going to see a lot of people never calling themselves Gullah. They did call themselves Geechee. It was the white people that called them Gullah. And almost in all cases, if not 100% of the cases, they called them Gullahs to make fun of them. Like I said, Gullah and Geechee were never used together until about the mid-1900s. Other than that, Gullah was used to make fun of you, whereas Geechee was used to refer to the people themselves. Typically, people took on the moniker of a Geechee, whereas white people called you a Gullah. Now, in order to figure out what they were called before they were called Geechee, you're going to have to figure out what are some of the earliest things that you can find with the word Geechee and Gullah in it. Once you've come to a stopping point, typically around the mid to late 1800s, then you have to ask the question, who was in this same exact area prior to it being something called Geechee and Gullah? And that's when you start taking a history lesson down into what the Indian tribes were that were in this same exact coastal area during those years. So when you go to the archives and you look up the word Geechee, now we're going to be looking up the oldest things we can find with the word Geechee in it, to try to see if we can find some of the primary sources or the first times we've ever seen the word used. So we're going to sort this list into the oldest listed, but when you do that, you're not going to go that far back. You're going to go about as far back as the early 1900s. And we're going to do the same thing with the word Gullah. When you look up the word Gullah in the Internet Archive and try to sort to the oldest books that you can find, to try to find some of the oldest and most primary sources to see when the word kind of came into inception, you're not going to go back that far. In fact, it's going to be about the early 1900s where you're going to see the earliest sources, one by Ambrose Gonzalez. But these people were still here. Now, when you go to the archives and you type in South Carolina, you're going to get a completely different thing. When we sort the primary source books from the archive to the oldest about South Carolina, that's going to take us way back to about the early or mid to late 1600s, about 1700s. Lots of information about South Carolina, but nothing about Geechees or Gullahs. So we're going to be able to figure out who was here prior to a Geechee, prior to a Gullah. And some of these books will reference actual Florida. Why? Because Florida was the landmass before it became South Carolina. It was also an area called Chicora. In fact, you're going to have to look into the history of both South Carolina and Florida in order to figure out who was there before these Geechees were here. Because the information about the Geechees and the Gullahs that doesn't really start in newspapers and books until the mid to late 1800s is only going to take you so far. Once you start looking into the history of South Carolina as well as the history of Florida, that's when you're going to start to see books, newspaper documents, manuscripts, things of that nature that show you who those people were in that area prior to them being called Geechees.
When Gullah Geechee culture first emerged from the soil of the Carolina coast, there was no North and South Carolina. There was Carolina, and it got renamed from Chicora to Carolina. And so in this region, now we would say that Gullah Geechee culture emerged on the coast of South Carolina.
Now, if you want to know more information about South Carolina before it was called South Carolina, right, you're going to have to look up multiple different types of books. Now, you can go and find lots of information about the history of South Carolina, but those books will still only get you so far because the area of South Carolina was called Florida before that. In fact, the whole area was Florida, but this particular section of Florida, which was the South, was also called something different. It wasn't called Florida, it was called Chicora. Chicora was the original name of the area of what is present-day South Carolina. And that's important because if you're looking through books of from the 1600s to the 1700s and the early 1800s, you're not going to find information about Geechees. You're not going to find a lot of information about South Carolina. You will find some about South Carolina. Some of that information comes in around the 1700s, mid to early 1700s. You want to go back to 1600s and 1500s, you're going to have to look for Chicora because Chicora is what's going to be in the books. Yes, Chicora. We even have the Chicora Chronicle listed here that I found in the Internet Archive. And it talks about how Chicora was the original name of South Carolina. This was something that was found by or written by Peter Martyr in one of his voyages. Also, when you check maps like this from Lemoyne, you can zoom in and you will see Chicora listed here in the South Carolina area next to Charles Fort, which becomes Charlestown. Here's another map by Lemoyne in 1590. Pushing in on this map, you will also see Chicora down here by Charles Fort. Charles Fort becomes Charlestown. Coming over to the French archives, you'll see here, moving in closely, there's another map and it shows Chicora right here, or Chicola. Now here's another map that actually is going to show you the start of Carolina. Now you're going to see a dotted line right here where Carolina starts to be formed and Chicora is no more. That's the beginning of the area of Carolina. And this is what was spoken about by Peter Martyr in his book. He actually spoke about the Chicora Indians, how tall they were, and all of their descriptions. Now, even though the Chicora people are known to be extinct to a degree, there are still some funny looking people today that claim to be the descendants of the Chicora people.
Chicora people.
More typically, Martin's people, the Shikori, or as they're better known, the Chicora, are expressing their identity this way. Every month or so, Martin holds a gathering. One of the centerpieces of these get-togethers is a kind of open hand to others who are seeking ethnic identity.
It's just, right now, mostly word of mouth that anyway that brings it to us because we haven't had the exposure locally. So just for that reason, they only hear bits and pieces. So then they start to come to us asking the questions. As you'll hear repeated often, it's a learning process for all of us. Good to see you. Yeah, I remember. We want to stay in close touch with our people. We'll have a gathering every 2 months. See, we don't just place people on a tribal roll book, assign them a tribal number and forget about it. We like to stay in close contact with them.
The Chicora Indians, a Grand Strand American tribe, are picketing. The protest presents a man of sharp contrasts, willing on the one hand to proclaim widely his strong views, yet he says it's a proclamation without bitterness.
It just wasn't discussed, you know. We knew that we wasn't white, we knew we wasn't black. See, and after my daddy moved from the farm, there's one section of Conway where the Native American people lived that separated the whites from the blacks, and we moved into that part of Conway many years ago.
The Chicora, like most of South Carolina's non-Catawba native people, live with an identity of confused acceptance and denial on the part of the greater society. On the one hand, they can obtain some meager federal benefits for their Indian ancestry, and at the same time have that ancestry officially ignored.
This is my trot line and fish trap tags from the state of South Carolina. It comes from Columbia. You have to fill out a special application to get this. If you will notice the race on here, I'm classified as other. 0 for other. You'll notice this is the hunting and fishing license. You'll notice the race on it. The state of South Carolina doesn't recognize any Indians other than the Catawba Indians.
Now, can these people even tie themselves back genealogically through paperwork to an 1800s, 1700s relative that could claim to be a Chicoran? Do you think the people who were Chicorans were explained to be looking as pale as these people when the voyagers hit the shores? I find it really odd that people like this can make these claims, and they still do today, and people ask no questions. In fact, the Chicorans, people from Chicora, were found by Christopher Columbus in the 1492 time. Now, yes, Christopher Columbus didn't land in the mainland, but he said from the mainland many men came as he was down there in the Bahamas, or what they call the Hlikuhios. I'm going to show you a book from 1551 in the Library of Congress that will explain to you that Christopher Columbus went down to the Hlikuhian Islands, or the Bahamas, and when he got there, he saw people from Florida, Chicora, and the Yucatan. All of those people were there in the Bahamas at that time when he showed up. Now we're going to take a look in the book of Peter Martyr, De Orbo Novo, a 1500s book. This book is listed on the Daltall Island website. The Daltall Island is an island in the Gullah Geechee corridor, and you will see Chicora listed many times throughout the text in this page. Now we're going to translate this with ChatGPT because it's in a different language, but you will see Chicora within the book itself. And coming here on a translated page, it says, from among the Chicorans who were captured, they brought one to Hispaniola, a youth about 15 years old, who being instructed in the faith was baptized and called Franciscus, and from the name of the country received a surname Chicoranus. While the business of the colony was delayed, I often saw and spoke with Franciscus Chicoranus, who was intelligent and not unskilled in speech, though clumsy in tongue, as the Spaniards say of them. It also shows here that they eat potatoes, sweet roots, like sweet potatoes, while growth beneath the soil, and are an excellent taste, not unlike our chestnuts. Now that was in the De Orbo Novo, but also in the letter of Fernando de Soto. Don't forget, we showed you that he also went to Chicora. So Chicora was well known. Coming into this 1551 book in the Library of Congress on the conquest of Mexico and New Spain, we're going to translate a particular page which talks about Cristobal Colon and the Chicoran people right here, as you can see, and Florida. All of these things are listed, even Haiti. And it talks here about the Hlikuhio Islands. It says they lie between 10 and 17 and 18 degrees. They were the first land sighted by Christopher Columbus. And we're going to come down a little bit further. It says, from the mainland, many men came, like those from Florida, Chicora, and the Yucatan, and dwelt among them, and thus they were more handsome than those of the other islands. It says here that the people of Chicora are of an olive complexion, tall in body, and with very little beard. They wear their hair black down to the waist. The women's hair is very long, and they all braid it. It also states that the king of these was like a giant, and he was called Datha. And in the caption, it says this section explains how indigenous captives died on the journey and how Vasquez de Ayllón nonetheless pressed the Spanish crown for rights to settle Chicora.
They are called Arambe, Guacasilla, Cothathe, Tazaca, and Tathor. The color of the inhabitants is dark brown.
Do these people look like the descendants of people who were dark brown?
None of them have any system of writing, but they preserve traditions of great antiquity in rhymes and chants. Dancing and physical exercises are held in honor, and they are passionately fond of ball games, in which they exhibit the greatest skill. The women know how to spin and sew, although they are partially clothed with the skins of wild beasts.
We do, however, have people who can tie themselves back to these tribes in Chicora that are actually dark brown.
I'm from the Chicora Nation and a part of the Wakamo Nation. They're part of the larger Tuscarora Nation and Southern Iroquois Nation. Most of the Southern Iroquois would migrate north and become a part of the Northern Iroquois Confederation. But many of those who stayed south and now are part of the Cherokee Greater Nation in the mountains of North Carolina. Even though the Cherokee leadership today act more like they're white folks than indigenous people. No disrespect, but truth is the light, because my family went there at the invitation of brothers and sisters who were Cherokee.
Papa and Grandpapa them come from.
Yeah, because
George Bland and all of them.
Because
you said they came. There were some Indians down in Charleston too that was brought up under the Bland name.
They say they must too, cause they say Papa and I know where the Indians bought Papa them Papa or who bought. But they say they was Indian. Mixed up in Indian. Cause we had a uncle. You couldn't tell him if he wasn't in a white man. Papa broke. And I was scared of that man. Oh Lord.
What was you scared of him for?
Because he's big and tall heavy and all that. And I was scared of him. Because he's big and tall heavy and all that. And I was scared of him. Because he's big and tall heavy and all that.
It says here that the people of Chikora are of an olive complexion, tall in body, and with very little beard.
Oh, that's because he's big and tall and talk heavy and all that, and all this stuff.
And this also goes for other Spanish explorers. You got Spanish explorers like Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón. Now, the Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón exploration is something that a lot of FBAs try to utilize. In fact, they have that 1526 year put on their FBA flag because they say that's when the first Africans hit the shores. But when you look into the history of actually Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón's voyage, he never even touched the coast of Africa. He went straight from Spain down to the islands. Eventually they got to the islands, and then when they got to the islands, before he came to Chikora, or present-day South Carolina, he grabbed slaves from the adjacent islands of Hispaniola that were Indian slaves and took them up to Chikora, or present-day South Carolina. Now, these are the slaves that they said started the rebellion, because not anywhere else in the documents, in the books, does it say that he had African slaves. The only slaves aboard his ship it showed were people who were Indians from the islands. So to know more about how to find the primary sources for Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón, we're going to just use a little bit of AI in order to find the main sources. Now, here are the 4 top books that list Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón's voyage, and we've read every one of them, or I have, and I'm going to show you those. So we're going to show you the primary voyages to see when did any African slaves show up. Now, before we do that, don't forget that in the America book, even books after the primary source books, it shows that Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón set sail to fetch slaves from the adjacent islands for the gold mines. So we know that Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón was fetching slaves from adjacent islands. Why would he be doing that if he already had African slaves on his boat in his possession?
The Spanish Empire could expand on the back of private investment. Now, the king specified that no natives were to be enslaved unless taken as of a result of war. As such, de Ayllón did resolve to buy native captives from their enemies. Meanwhile, the Franciscans were to spearhead the friendly conversion of the native population.
Coming into other books here, like the rise of the colonies in South Carolina, you'll find pages like this, which will tell you that they encouraged them to bring captives to Charleston for the purpose of transportation to the West Indies. Also here on the 136th page, it says they might send for provisions, lumber, and Indian captives to the West Indies. But coming in further on these websites, they will tell you that these were African slaves that were in San Miguel de Guadalupe, or Wale area, in McIntosh County, and these Africans set foot here and started a revolt. This is the same information on the FBA website. Foundational Black Americans believe that Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón brought in some of the first black people on these shores as well, but there's no information in any of these books that states that at all, because that information would have to be listed in one of these 4 primary sources. One of these 4 primary sources would have to have the word African slaves or something about him going to Africa in it. And that's not something that you find listed in these sources. Here's another one of those sources, and you can literally just right click and translate the Historia General y Natural de las Indias. And this is the Lucas Vasquez area, and it does not say anything about Africa. And as we saw in the Book of America in 1671, it also says that not only were these not Africans, but these were slaves from the adjacent islands who were natives or Indians captured from the islands by Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón. Again, why would he need to capture Indian slaves if he already had African slaves? That's because the Black and African sources come later in modern times. You have sources like this report done by a Douglas T. Peck in recent times that actually starts to list black slaves in Chikora during Ayllón's voyage. So I don't know where he read that, but you'll see here also it talks about black slaves, not Indian slaves as the books has said before. And in another book, in a recent Low Country publication, it talks about an unknown number of enslaved Africans being in the 1526 Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón expedition. Doesn't provide a source at all on where they came. It states that the Africans appear to have been left behind to live and die amongst the Wale Indians, but at the same time, we don't never see any Africans being sent there. So this should be people from the islands have been left to live or die amongst the Wale Indians. Now, Tariq Nasheed talks about San Miguel de Guadape all the time. It's the basis for the 1526 story. Here's one of the posts where he talks about it directly. Instead of showing a source, he says, for more info, Google San Miguel de Guadape settlement that was in the area known as South Carolina. You will see documented proof that black people established the first foreign settlement here in North America almost 100 years before the others. Statements like this from true historians should be backed up by primary sources, screenshots, and direct links, not just telling you to go Google something. But I wanted to know where his source was, so I finally found a link that he shared talking about the same San Miguel de Guadape situation and black people being here in America during that time being brought over by the Spanish. Going to the link, it's literally a Pan-African website with an article about San Miguel de Guadape. It's not the actual sources, but I still wanted to read through it to see what I find. And coming in, you're going to see that yes, they mentioned that this is the first time that enslaved Africans came to these shores. But when you look down in their sources, every single one of these sources almost were done in the 2000s. These are the most modern of the modern sources you can find. Nobody other than this one Peter Martyr source from 1912 has even anything near the time frame from that period. And like I said before, if you only stick to modern sources, you're only going to get modern answers. And that's not going to tell you the truth from the people themselves or people who were around the people. And I'm not surprised that Tariq Nasheed used an African source, a Pan-African source. It's typically something that he believes in. He actually believes that he is an African. And people try to say that they're not with this whole FBA thing. But truthfully, he says you're African.
African people racially, ethnically, we are a different group. Ethnically, we're foundational Black Americans. I acknowledge my African racial inherent DNA and the connection I have with other African descended people globally. We have a connection as far as intrinsic race and biology. So I acknowledge that. No problem with that. When I travel to Africa or any other place where there are black people, I see a commonality with that.
The problem with this statement is that many of our people can tie themselves back to these original Indian tribes, the Yuchis, the Yamasis, and others, but typically none of them can find an African.
In convincing Narvaez to end his pursuit of Hernan Cortez, De Ayllón, not a military man, was promptly placed on a boat and shipped back east. This failure aside, on the island of Hispaniola, he also made his bones as an owner of a sugar plantation, which, yes, meant that De Ayllón used enslaved people for their labor. De Ayllón, like many in the Spanish New World, developed an opinion very different than that of Las Casas, even compared to his Spanish brethren back home, concerning the nature of slavery and who could be condemned to live as a slave. In De Ayllón's case, he reasoned that because some of the natives of the Caribbean practiced cannibalism, and I'll say less than kosher bedroom practices for the time, that these natives could be justifiably enslaved by their actions. Obviously, De Ayllón lived in a time very different than our own. The plantations of the Caribbean were in need of constant new slave labor. In this era, just after the time of Christopher Columbus and then his son Diego, it was the native peoples of the Americas who were reduced to enslavement in these Spanish colonies. The Spanish slavers scoured the North American coast to find new slaves to bring back to these plantations. De Ayllón would be no different. In 1521, he financed an expedition to find a good harbor under Captain Francisco Cordelia for a new colony. However, other sources indicate he actually sent out the captain on a slaving mission to the Bahamas. Either way, Cordelia joined forces with a certain Captain Pedro de Quexo, who, finding the Bahamas nearly void of a population, they sailed north to capture natives along the southeast coast of North America, today the American South, where Spanish slavers such as Captain Pedro Salazar noted how large the natives were compared to the natives of New Spain, and called the area the land of giants. Unfortunately for these robust people, to the Spanish this implied they would make for a hardier enslaved population. Gordilla and Quexos then capture 2 natives on the Pidi River at Winya Bay. These 2 they ply with gifts and send them back to their people. The Spaniards then lived with the natives for several days, and unknown to the natives, claimed the land for Spain. Gaining their trust, they lured a group of 60 to 70 people onto their boats and sailed away. Diayan was certainly not an abolitionist. However, he was a judge, and living in the Caribbean in the time immediately after the true chaos of the first impulse of Spanish colonization, Diayan knew that these natives were different from those taken in the Bahamas, and were enslaved under no legal pretense in the Spanish system, or according to his own system of morality, as we discussed before. And the attitude of the Spanish Empire now tilt towards ensuring peaceful relations with the newly encountered native groups. That may be a good place to start. Quexos maps all the way up to modern-day Delaware, returning with more captive natives and just the smallest bits of gold and silver. We now know that precious goods like copper or pearls were traded over very long distances of the North American continent. The gold and silver taken from natives of modern-day Delaware could have come from half a continent away.
And why is that important? Because the Indians from the islands and from the mainland have been shifted back and forth for many years through some of these explorers. Now, this is mainly along the coastal areas, not necessarily all throughout the mainland, but that's what you're going to find is that it is Indians who are being enslaved by some of these Spaniards in most cases.
Old colonial histories is a question of Native American revolt and how afraid the colonists up and down the East Coast and down into the Caribbean were of this revolt. So in 1502, you get one of the earliest ones where the Spanish governor of Hispaniola asks the King of Spain, essentially he just says, please don't send me anymore. They were by now very, very afraid of these Native Americans who had revolted and who almost won the war in this region. And so several thousands of them are deported. And the governor down in Barbados says that, he really doesn't want any more of these. Many of them are already there, but he says he really doesn't want any more of these because it's like a contagion to have them. These Native American uprisings that are taking place in Virginia and Maryland and New York, and now these people are deported or sold down into the Caribbean and causing trouble.
How did they classify these individuals when they moved them from here to other locales? Did they still call them Indians, or they classify them as just like a colored race?
In the early records, you see people classified by the names of their nations, and I mean Native American nations. As time goes on, you begin to see them classified as things like Musty. Some of those names still would have been used, but when they get to the Caribbean is when they really get lost into just being called the Indians, because these are exported from the United States because of the rebellions and the revolts and sold into the Caribbean, where they practically disappear in some of the places that they were expelled to. And that's a different case from the Taino.
You also have stories like Francisco de Jacora. Francisco de Jacora was an Indian from Jacora who was known to be baptized. His name ended up becoming Francisco de Jacora. De is of. Jacora is Jacora. Francisco was the new name he got when he went through being baptized through the Spaniards. So Francisco de Jacora is Francisco, an Indian who changed his name and is from Jacora.
Growing up, they heard about slavery or being in the South. I just never thought about the fact that
the indigenous Americans and the Africans combined.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you were in a perfect place to ask about that, because here in Beaufort County, when you drove on to St. Helena, there are 2 islands that sit on the side of St. Helena, Dato Island and Palawan Island. most people are not familiar with either one of those islands. I am, because that is where my father's side of the family are from. Dator is named after Chief Dator, who was no doubt a Kusabo Indian. Okay, Palawana Island, which sits right next to it, was actually the first Indian reservation signed into law in the United States. I didn't find that out until I was a grown woman doing my own research for my own books on Gullah Geechee culture. And I decided I wanted to find out, what did these names of where I live mean? I knew they were Native American names.
Now, the Indians have a rich history along that entire coast. A really rich history. In fact, it's Peter Martyr de Angleria who actually went there at one point, or actually wrote a book about it called De Orbo Novo. And in this actual book, he talks about Alian's voyage, he talks about Chikora, he talks about King Datha. King Datha is somebody who's mentioned also by Queen Quet, who is of the Gullah Geechee tribe now. That's the queen of the Gullah Geechee tribe today. He's mentioned as somebody who, one of her ancestors grew up on the island that's named after King Datha. So King Datha is mentioned in the Peter Martyr de Angleria book in the 1500s as being a prominent Indian there, and the actual island is listed and named after him. And you're going to be able to find King Datha in another one of those same primary sources, the Peter Martyr de Angleria source. Angleria is England, Angleland. And this was also on the Daltau Island website. There is a website organization dedicated to this. And it says here, and when you translate it, they call her queen, King Datha. He reigned over 500 tribes. Now, there's a Daltau Island right here next to Palawana Island. Both of those are what was mentioned by Queen Quet. It makes me want to bring up this, which references Peter. It says, in another part of America, if reliance can be placed upon the correctness of the relation, a race of blacks was seen so early a period of our history that it seems impossible to avoid the conclusion that they were aboriginal. Peter Martyr, in the 3-decade in describing the journey of Balboa during the Isthmus of Darien AD 1511, gives the following history. There is a region above 2 days' journey from Quarina in which they found only blackamoors, and those exceeding fierce and cruel. The circumstances of finding them there, they tried to attempt to explain with conjecture that they were Ethiopians who had crossed the Atlantic to rob the country after some had been shipwrecked. But really, it's nothing about that. They showed that that would be conjecture, and that these people were just kind of making up some type of reason on why they see so many black looking people on these shores. In fact, many of the islands along that coast, Palawana Island, Esquimalt, Edisto, a lot of these are Indian tribe names that you don't know existed because they have been called expired, because they act like these people no longer existed. But these and many others, Kusas, Kusabos, Yamasis, many others were in this area, Wackamal, a lot of different ones that they never talk about. There's only a couple of them that have some type of recognition today. Otherwise, these people are known as expired tribes. Expired tribes are just basically a way to erase you. Erase what your tribe was, whether your people are there or not. Now, some people will try to say that the Indians were wiped out with diseases. Well, you have a Library of Congress historian that will sit here and tell you directly that diseases is not the cause for all the Indians being lost. And the whole thing the fact that they even use the whole thing of smallpox and things of that nature is a labor-saving device in order to explain why they don't see Indians anymore in modern times. Meaning that they will say, hey, we don't know where these Indians are. We're just going to say they perished due to disease, and there's no more. You got to look into it. And a lot of people go with that propaganda all the time without any proof of it.
I wondered, we all hear about Native Americans dying off quite a bit because of diseases, and I noticed you only mentioned one. I wondered where we were with that episode.
I wish I could give you a better answer than the answer I'm going to give you, and that is, I'm very cautious about disease and using disease to explain massive depopulation without some more written and archaeological evidence of it. The striking thing when you look at the colonial records, the 16th century especially, is there are very few references to large-scale epidemic disease. Elsewhere in the Indies, if you look at historical demography in central Mexico, in what becomes Colombia, New Granada, and Peru, when disease episodes like that happen, people write about them. Friars write about them, lay officials write about them. Everybody makes mention of these things. And right now, what's striking in the Florida example is how rare those references are to large-scale disease. And one of my worries about that sometimes is that disease can be used as a rather easy way to explain, to leave Native Americans out of the history. A kind of labor-saving device to talk about early Florida history as a European story without Native Americans. Native Americans outnumber Europeans throughout the entire colonial period. The entire colonial period. There are more than there are Spaniards. And we need to write them in, not leave them out and just dismiss them as, well, they all died. There weren't any left. They're all gone. And it's unfortunate that no one has really picked up on where Henry Dobbins kind of left off. We need some more rigorous historical demography. John and I have talked about these for even the Wale sites. It's very difficult because the Spaniards did not keep detailed census records. Now, if we find the mission records, that will change what we know about historical demography and will certainly give us a window into disease that we don't have right now. So it's not to say that there weren't massive episodes, but until I see better evidence of them, I'm cautious about saying, yeah, they're there. I think it's more interesting that they vastly outnumber Spaniards and how rare episodes like this are. Those military encounters between Spaniards and Native Americans are rare episodes. And we need to understand in a much more sophisticated way why.
Another thing I had to do was actually go into all of the Spanish explorers, the main ones that came here, to see, can I find in any primary sources that these Spanish explorers ever wrote about taking a pathway to Africa from Spain before veering off towards the West Indies and the mainland Americas. And that's something that you do not see, whether it be Lucas Vasquez de Ayala, whether it be Juan Ponce de Leon, whether it be Christopher Columbus, whether it be Hernan Cortez, many of these other ones, and I'm going to show you some, these people do not show in the actual primary source books that they ever came from Africa, that they ever veered off to Africa before coming this way. They never talk about a pit stop in Africa. In fact, none of the books that talk about these voyages even mention the word Africa at all. So then you got to wonder, who decided to start putting the African language in there, and when did it get inserted?
God provides Spain with a route to Asia, and soon thereafter, Portugal and Spain divide the heathen areas of the globe between them. The optimism on the Iberian Peninsula must have hit a fevered pitch. Lucas de Ayala arrives in the New World in 1502, along with a large group of people under the command of the new governor of the Indies, Nicholas de Ovando, on the island of Santo Domingo. Living up to his family name, de Ayala made a name for himself as a mayor and magistrate, doing the same types of mid-level government work as his father and grandfather.
Now, if they really want you to believe that all of these people came from Africa that hit this coast and the Indians were wiped out, what they're basically trying to say is literally along this entire coast, all Indians were 100% completely wiped out. And then when the Africans were brought in, they literally picked up names like Geechee based off the Geechee River, but they're saying it's based off the African culture that was over there. So literally, this is what they want you to believe. They want you to believe that they brought some Africans over, some from a Geechee tribe, and they landed so close to South Carolina, they was next to the Geechee River, that they never even thought to call themselves after the Geechee River. They call themselves Geechee after their own people, and it just so happens to sound similar to Geechee. Now, this is the stories that they're trying to push to you instead of it being actual Indians who still live there under the Geechee River, which was named after their people under the Yuchis. And actually, I didn't mention it, but the Yuchis are some of the main Indians also within that area. And we're going to see a lot of information about the Yuchis being the name of the people who were in that area, as well as other tribes that were there as well. Now, some of the first people that even started bringing out this information about what a Gullah is are white folks. Ambrose Gonzalez, a Spaniard, he wrote one of the first books called The Black Border Gullah. And it's nothing but a bunch of folklore about people, and in many cases it's making fun of the people. Look at how these people talk about the way we speak in these documents, in these books. They're explaining it in a entertainment-like way. People like Julia Peterkin was one of the people who brought Gullah to the masses. Now, this is the book called Scarlet Sister Mary, and it was just making fun of Gullah people and how they talk, like I said before. Ain't you glad I'm gwine to see you, June? Not so glad, see May. Basically making fun of the way that people talk in Gullah speak. Another person is Ambrose E. Gonzalez, a Spaniard sounding name, who is one of the ones who wrote the earliest Gullah book that you can find, at least titled Gullah, and it's called The Black Border Gullah. Now, in here, he's also making fun of the way that people speak. It's just talking about massa this and that. It's really just making fun of the way people speak. There's no information about the Gullahs. There's no actual history. Funny enough, they try to attempt to explain what Gullah means, and it says none of the encyclopedias mention the Gullah Negroes, nor does the name appear in the dictionaries, Mr. John Bennett. So it really tells you already that the word Gullah is something that was pretty much coined. It doesn't appear anywhere, and it's not something that's listed anywhere or anywhere at all. Shows that, but in 1822, in a publication in the Charleston City Council at the time attempted Negro insurrection, reference is made of Gullah Jack and the company of Gullah or Angola Negroes. Again, referencing Angola, a landmass. Now, some of the earliest uses I could find of the word Gullah references Gullah Jack, but also I found actual manuscripts, documents, and they actually list a Yuchi Jack. A Yuchi Jack, like a Gullah Jack in the same area, because the Yuchis have been known to be in this area and moved down and moved around Carolina and Florida. And they're making fun of the way people speak because these people speak very close to the Bahamians. They have an accent and a dialect that is very close to those in the Bahamas. And that's not really surprising. As I showed you earlier, Christopher Columbus had said when he got to the Hlikuhio Islands, he saw some Chicorans. How would he know that they're Chicorans and that area was called Chicora if he never hit the mainland? Because those people came from the mainland and had to tell him who they were. That's how he knew what it was. He didn't go there, but he seen the people there and he knew what they were called. There's many sources for that, but let's just look back at the same 1551 source about the conquest of Mexico and New Spain. And this states that the Carthaginian merchants sailing from the Straits of Gibraltar toward the west after many days found a large uninhabited island. They describe it as fertile with navigable rivers, and I have cited some of the authors who mention it above. Now, this was not Christopher Columbus, but he was well aware of it. And he also had news of those new lands through the account of the dead pilot he consulted with learned men about what the ancients had written regarding other lands and worlds. And it says that it seems to me that Christopher Columbus, long before he came to Spain, had already thought of where the Indies were located, and that he had long sought out the writings of Seneca, which speak of the ships crossing the ocean in search of something to discover. Going further into the history of this Geechee people, you start to find these different tribal names. As I said, Yuchi people. Geechee is named after the river of the Yuchis. But it's also one of these things you're going to see in the newspaper. You see people calling themselves Geechee Bill, Geechee Charlie, Big Geechee. Just like Big Meats, right? We'll say names like that. We come up with these aliases, and they were utilizing, our own people were utilizing the word Geechee to describe themselves. Never Gullah. They never said, my name is Gullah Bill, Gullah this. They did say Geechee, but that's very similar to a lot of these other things that I found that showed Yuchi. There were people called Yuchi Bill, Yuchi Charlie, Tustanuki Yuchi. A lot of people utilizing the word Yuchi just like they utilized the word Geechee in order to call themselves some type of alias of a name. Same thing in the newspapers. You have a Yuchi Charlie, but you also have these people that refer to themselves as Geechee, Big Geechee. Now, because the word Geechee was used by the people themselves to refer to themselves as a Geechee, that's what makes me believe that these people, our people, decided to call themselves after the river that was there for the longest time.
What you is, Grandma?
Me, Geechee.
A Gullah Geechee?
Geechee, yeah.
You African descent?
No, not African.
What you is, American descent?
American, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Some of them, yeah, they call me from, if I'm from Africa or from, but I'm not from Africa. I'm a full-blooded American.
My tribes don't descend from Africa. They descend from right here in the Savannah River. Yuchi, over 1,000 years. That's who we are. Through slavery, we're still here. Jim Crow, we're still here.
Now, I'm not sure when the point of where it goes from Geechee to Yuchi exactly happens, but we do know that Geechee does not start being utilized for the most part in documents by the people until the mid to late 1800s. Prior to then, they were calling themselves Yamasi, Yuchi, Whack-A-Mole, and the sort. Now, you don't get a lot of information about Geechee or Gullah, but as far as when you type in Yuchi in the government archive, you get lots of results. Thousands of results, many of them bounty land warrants, but lots of other census forms and other things. Coming in this book called The Ethnology of the Yuchi Indians, you have things that's like this. It says that the Shawnee came from above, the Creeks came from the ground, the Choctaw came from the water, and the Yuchi came from the sun. Now, this is just a reference to some of the oral stories that were told back in the day.
I am Yuchi, Tahola, children of the sun. This is who I am in the Savannah River Valley, where my people have been for over 1,000 years. We're here. We didn't go to Oklahoma. We stayed and fought.
And those same Yuchi Indians are listed here with Lemoyne, Ribault, and Laudonnière, and also DeSoto. So some of these same voyagers were amongst these Yuchi Indians. And another thing to note here is it shows that the Yuchis believe that they are the original occupants of eastern Georgia and South Carolina. They have no migration legend. And when you look at the government list of expired tribes, it will tell you that the Yuchi Indians have disappeared, so to speak. But at the same time, when you come to the Florida website about the Seminole Indians, it will tell you that in addition to Creeks, Seminoles includes Yuchis, Yamasis, and a few Aboriginal remnants. So they know that these people still exist. And there are several maps that you're going to be able to find the Yuchi spelled multiple different ways still around. Right? So that's something that's very important, because as we track these tribes and these people, we're trying to find a point to where, when did the Indians completely leave and the Africans come in and take their place and give themselves names like Gullah and Geechee? Or when did they come in? Because they used to have the way that they said, hey, it was Gullah Geechee was supposed to be, Geechee was the Indians, Gullah was the Africans. And when they got here, they started to mix and mingle together like a mixed cocktail drink. And next thing you know, they're all of a sudden one amalgamated group of people that have a lot of Africanisms in the way that they speak in their culture, and that's completely bogus. Now, coming in some of these earliest books that you can find in the Library of Congress talking about the word Gullah, you're going to see that they're talking about a particular person. This is the slavery in South Carolina. All of these are about a particular person named Jack the Gullah Negro. You'll see it in multiple different books, the Gullah Jack. He would have been one of the first people called a Gullah, and even the war was called the Gullah War. So this is something that they eventually started calling these people, but you never see the word Gullah listed prior to this anywhere. But all of these books list a Gullah Jack. Here's another reference to a Gullah Jack. One thing's for sure is these people are Gullah Negroes, or so-called black people, as you can see here, but they're still referencing the same Gullah Jack. That's the one that they call Gullah before they started utilizing this name on the entire people on that coast. And Gullah Jack is listed here in the newspaper as a slave of an esquire. An esquire is somebody who is under a king. One thing that's very odd is in this particular paper, Gullah Jack is listed as a chief. Now, why would a Angolan African be in America listed as a chief? Which is odd indeed, but coming here into this document on Florida in the 1837 government archives, I found a letter from 1837. In this particular handwritten letter, it talks about St. Augustine in September of 1837, and you're going to see two people listed, a Yuchi Billy and a Yuchi Jack. Now, this is from General Jessup, and it shows that these people came from the South, having captured the Indian chiefs, Philip, and it also shows the chiefs Yuchi Billy and Yuchi Jack. Jack was a chief, not only as a Yuchi, but also apparently as a Gullah. And finding this newspaper article in 1891, it talks about Indian skeletons being unearthed in St. Augustine, Florida. The same St. Augustine that was listed in the 1837 letter about Yuchi Jack and Yuchi Billy. Coming back to this actual newspaper, it says, one of the oldest inhabitants who in the course of a brief conversation threw much light on the subject as to one skeleton at least. Mr. Masters is a man of 85 years of age and went through the first Seminole War as sergeant in the 1st St. Augustine Volunteers. It says the skeletons found yesterday, said he, must have been buried in the blankets without coffins or ceremony, and I believe that they are the bodies of Yuchi Billy and another Indian whose name I do not know, who died in the fort while prisoners. I have a special reason to remember Yuchi Billy in the summer of 1837, the same 1837 that letter was written in, and I was in my company near Dunnatown Plantation, or where the present town of Port Orange is situated. We were surrounded by a camp of Yuchi Indians and a fight ensued, and it goes on from there. But he was there in 1837 amongst Yuchi Billy and likely Yuchi Jack. Now, there's also this whole Yuchi Billy that was listed on the Seminole War map here. You'll see his actual location listed here directly on the map in the Second Seminole War. And I'm not surprised, because we showed before that the Yuchis were part of the Creeks, which were what became the Seminoles, as well as a few other tribes like the Yamasees and other ones. And as we come here to the Creek Treaty of 1796, you'll be able to also see that the Yuchis were for sure part of the Creeks. As we come in closely, you'll see that you have Yuchis here, Yuchi Miko and MS Yuchis. Under here you have a Yuchis, a Tusta Nagi Chati Yuchi, but also you have land bounty warrants. One particular land bounty warrant for a Kosa Hopi Yuchi. And when you look in close, it shows that Pen Hajo, a Creek Indian, a resident of the Creek Nation who is being duly sworn, declares that he is the duly appointed guardian of Mandy, a Creek girl of 10 years old, minor child of Kosa Hopi Yuchi, And it basically says here that Pinharjo is going to become the guardian of Mandy, who is actually the title holder for the land that is left by Kosahopi Yuchi, her father. So this shows that the Yuchis were definitely prominent and their descendants are still here. And when you come in here to even the Dolls Roads, you see a Billy Yuchi. And these people actually utilize these Yuchis as people who they descend from, because these are their fathers, these are their people. And you can find many bounty land warrants under the Yuchis. So we know that the Yuchis were here. And also, when I went searching for Billy Bowlegs on the Seminole map for the Seminole War, that's somebody I do not find. I do find Yuchi Billy, but I do not find Billy Bowlegs. Now, Billy Bowlegs should be listed on here, as they said in one of these 3 wars of the Seminole Wars, he was somebody they were going against. And this one in this particular map is from 1836. Not to mention there's a Negro town in this map. But coming back to this Seminole map, again, we're looking for a Billy Bowlegs. And Billy Bowlegs is listed in the newspapers in later times, 1840s and so on, and he does have records of him being dead at certain points in time. But one thing I do find interesting is Billy Bowlegs was known as a scout for the United States Army. And you look in here multiple times, you can see multiple documents of him being a scout. Now, there's newspapers stating that Billy Bowlegs was a military chief in 1818, and that's odd because around that same time, or at least after that in 1837 and before, you got a Yuchi Billy who was listed as a chief in the same area. Now, we see Yuchi Billy's information around. We see where he's listed on these Seminole maps. We don't see Billy Bowlegs. Could Billy Bowlegs be made up and the actual Yuchi Billy be the real Billy that we're talking about? I'm not sure, because there are multiple records about Billy Bowlegs. But it's crazy because you have both a Billy Bowlegs and a Yuchi Billy, both on the Dolls Rolls with descendants. You also have here a Yuchi Jack, and we have a Gullah Jack. So it's really funny there. And again, we're dealing with a Yuchi here, a Geechee there, and a Gullah there. So in the same area in South Carolina, Florida, we have Gullahs, we have Yuchis, we have Geechees. Could these all be the same people? Could these all be Yuchis? Now, we even still have depictions of what these people looked like that was in the South Carolina and Florida area from early day books and drawings and illustrations and all this other stuff that show what these Indians look like, copper colored Indians. Now, these are the people who were there and who are still there, but they want you to believe that these people completely left and in comes in some Africans to take their place. But there is lots of information and illustrations of these people pretty much almost up to the 1800s time. On maps in the French archive, you can easily see melanated, curly-haired Indians pointing arrows at lions. Also, here on other maps, you can easily see brown-colored Indians in the Americas listed on the map. This is how they drew the people in this particular time frame. These are the Virginia Indians listed on this particular map, melanated with curly hair and wearing a toga-like cotton mantle. You also have in the British Museum in 1703 a list of Virginia Indians selling tobacco, melanated, brown skin, curly haired with pearls. You got some here in 1703, curly haired with pearls, smoking tobacco in Virginia. Also here in Florida in 1671, you will see pictures of people drawn that are of a melanated or dark color with curly hair, not straight. Same thing with this America book in 1671. These are but a few depictions of the Indians supposedly within the South of the Americas at that time. So you're going to see multiple versions of different sources that's going to list these particular Indians in the same type of way as other voyagers have. And another thing they're going to try to get you to believe is that these people speak some kind of broken English that's derived from a broken tongue of African, which is why Lorenzo Del Turner wrote the book Africanisms in the Gullah Dialect, which is fully a crock of shit. When you actually go through the book, you don't see a lot of things that we do in there. You don't see a lot of words that connect and things of that nature. It's a whole lot of things. In fact, most of the book is about names. That's a whole nother story. But when you actually read it, you don't really find those words. And in fact, I did a study on those words because they said that, hey, this word biddy sounds exactly as what they call, it's a word that they use over there in Africa called biddy. And tote is another word that they use over there in Africa. And then they would show the African language as Kimbundu or whatever. So I ended up going into actual old dictionaries that were around prior to Lorenzo Del Turner, his book. I'll go to old dictionaries of those languages to see if those words are in there. And it's funny what you catch. Now again, Lorenzo Del Turner went to Paris to learn his Africanisms that he said he found in the Gullah dialect. And I was curious about those words. And here he has a list of the languages for those words that he chose. But I found in the newspapers a particular list of certain words that he tried to say had Africanisms in them. These words like this here. And it says here, it may start with the first known Americanism, the word tote. It says meaning carry. And then when you come down further, it says putting them in work carrying loads. Probably the first words their overseers heard them say and learn was to tell them was tote. So according to him, the word tote is a direct translation from the Congo language. But when you come into the Congo language dictionary, you'll find that the word tuta means to carry or to tote. Tuta. Now, shouldn't the first words they would have said been tuta instead of tote? Coming into another passage here, they're talking about the words biddy, bitty bitty for chick, or it means a bird in Congolese. Bitty bitty. So I went to an actual dictionary for the Congolese language. This is from the Congo language here, and we're going to take a look to see if we see that word here, and we do not see the word biddy where it should be next to bid. And actually under bird, you see a completely different word for that word bird. And also under the word chicken, you do not see any word resembling biddy. There isn't too many other words that he goes over in this document, but it really makes me question his research. If I can't find those words in the actual dictionaries from those languages, then where did he get them? But these people have always had a Bahamian islander kind of influence. These people have been going back and forth themselves through the island. And I can also show you lots of documents where the people were being shipped back and forth as slaves many times, all the time. In the newspapers, by the Lucas Vasquez, the Alian, through different explorers, they were going back and forth because they were being sent there to be slaves, Indians being slaves. But they wanted to conflate the slavery with the Africans only. But it seems people want to ignore the influence of the people sent to or from the West Indies to the coast of the mainland in the South. All of these documents and even paper sources will tell you that these people were shipped to the Indies or vice versa. And that would exactly explain the influence of their speech.
History and its culture. The town falls in the midst of the Gullah Geechee corridor, which expands from Jacksonville, North Carolina, down to Jacksonville, Florida.
The enslaved people, as they grew rice and other things and lived on the coast, and they established their own kind of language and stuff like that.
Hi, I'm Professor Janice Marie Collins of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Welcome to A Taste of Gullah. I'm so glad you could join me. You know, there's a wonderful, somewhat hidden treasure right here in America that I'd like to tell you a little bit about. It's believed to be hundreds and hundreds of years old, and in some way, shape, or form, you're probably connected to it. I'm speaking of the Gullah culture. The Gullah people are believed to be the first Africans to touch the Low Country region, better known by the locals as the Lowlands or Sea Islands, which once stretched from North Carolina to Florida. Well, I wanted to capture parts of this culture in all its splendor with stories by and about its own people. So beginning in 2009, I headed down south during my spring breaks for 3 weeks. In 1 week intervals, I started to record sights and sounds of Gullah. The language is an emic term known as Geechee, also called Sea Island Creole. This way of speaking is related to Jamaican patois, Barbadian dialect, Bahamian dialect, Belizean Creole.
Notice here, they mention all of these influences of being Geechee, Sea Island Creole, Jamaican, Barbadian, Bahamian, Belizean. So they know that these islands have a very big influence on the dialect on the south coast of the mainland. Yet the only influence from Africa they try to say comes from Sierra Leone. Yet Sierra Leone was known from where they sent a bunch of our people to.
Gal, where you come here for? That means what are you here for? You here to take a tour, okay? Yeah. Now, when we go into a lot of these old black neighborhoods, guess what they like to say, gal? Them tours come us in we neighborhood, act like they ain't want to be mopping from their now some way. Meaning those tourists coming in our neighborhoods act as if they don't want to speak to us. They must be northerners.
If I were to ask you, are you related to the Gullah culture, the Gullah people?
Yeah, I am.
You are what?
Related to them.
You're related to the Gullah people? The Gullah culture?
I know I am. Now, how far back, I don't know, but pretty much everybody around here has some kind of root tied into the Gullah people, family.
Nate was born and raised right here in Hardyville, which is also known as Little Savannah, or Slowville. Tour guide Al Miller in Savannah, Georgia, keeps the spirit alive by sharing what he knows about all the sayings and goings of the Gullah Island.
New Year's Day, never let that woman be the first to enter the house. It must be a man.
For over 20 years, he's been one of the leading tour guides of the Gullah Lowland and Highlands, and the owner of Sights and Insights Tours since 1993. Miller says his love of the Gullah culture and its people started early.
It all extends from high school. When I studied South Carolina history, I was just fascinated with all this history about Charleston, because Charleston was actually the beginning, even though today Columbia is the capital.
For example, Miller was born in Mullins, South Carolina, a little town north of Charleston, so in some ways he would be seen as an outsider and referred to in that manner.
So the locals look at me and say, look a yama benya, you a come ya. See, a benya means that you came here. Come ya means that you came here.
Gullah or Geechee, you know, like people can't spread their words out the way you want to do it, but it's something, you know, as we age, you know, because I'm 77 years old now. And as I speak, I know sometimes it come out wrong. But you know, you want to put it in place, but you know, it's hard. Hard for me to do it, you know. I mean, went that far in school. I only went to 6th grade. Graduated from 6th grade. Like 6th grade, we had to go in the field and work. And I raised up by stepfather, okay? And me and my 3 sisters, we had to, you know, get in the field or if we want anything. And my word, I don't know, it seems like so hard to come out, you know. When you see that little girl, she correct me all the time. No, Grandma, you know, I don't understand you too good, Grandma. I said, how you mean you can't understand me? You can understand that there are other things, right? You can understand me. No, Grandma, I don't understand you. Anything for a while. Yeah, something. Some of them, yeah, they call me from, if I'm from Africa or from, you know, I'm not from Africa. I'm a full-blooded American. As long as I can speak, you know, that people can understand something. I understand the way y'all speak.
Houses dating from over 100 years ago revealed a strong Low Country and West Indian influence on the Creole people. The same influence marks the speech of Creoles like Arthur John.
How you do? How are you? That's how you do. You see? How are you? How you do? But it's, you see, it's similar. You see? Come, go. We talk it in Creole and it's an English word. You see? When we have our own different time of Creole, you see, with no connection with English words. But most of these Creole words derive from the English words.
In Gullah, for example, the phrase, I'm happy to meet you becomes I'm glad for meet you. And in Creole,
I'm glad for meet you. I'm happy. I'm glad. Happy is used in Creole also. But anyway, if you don't want to say happy, you say I'm glad for see you. I'm glad for meet you.
to a group in Gullah, I'm glad for meet Una. In Creole,
I'm glad for meet Una. Una. You see? No.
China in the 1930s. Among the creeks and islands of the southeast coastal lowcountry, the Gullah were removed from the mainstream of society. This was a culture that a young black scholar named Lorenzo Turner found when he began researching the Gullah and their language. Folklorists and historians had studied this unusual culture before Turner. They concluded that the Gullah merely borrowed and corrupted English and European language and customs. Some even believed the Gullah were addled in their speech, backward baby talkers whose tongues were incapable of forming proper English. Turner pushed these old prejudices aside. More than anyone before him, he was able to penetrate the communities along the coast. Where others heard Gullah only as a primitive pidgin English, Turner found a rich language that owed as much to Africa as it did to Europe. Jokos Tengova, a Sierra Leonean linguist, is following in Turner's footsteps.
That work is seminal. It really is the start-off point for most of us who are now investigating Gullah. Well, Turner's argument is that if one doesn't know about the African languages, then obviously one is not in a position to say there has been an influence from them. So I think that's why he set himself the task of trying to understand some of these languages, and he set for himself the task of trying to study a couple of them, about 30.
Many Gullahs kept private names, basket names, they called them. Names that no outsider ever heard. Names like Limba and Loco are strange to our ears.
First, they got Lorenzo Dal Turner to do some studying on the Geechee people who is not a Geechee person, and that's after the white people had already done a lot of so-called studying on you. Now, according to this documentary, they had a African guy here that's going to be furthering the study from Lorenzo Dal Turner. So you've had a white person coming in here trying to study what the Geechees are. You have a black person coming in here studying what the Geechees are who's not a Geechee, and you have an African who's coming in to study what the Geechees are that's not a Geechee. I wonder when they're going to get somebody who's a Geechee in the area to study the Geechees. And the practice of using outsiders to study the Geechee people is still going on today.
Dr. Maxine, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit further?
Well, hello there. I'm so excited to be a part of your podcast today. I'm Dr. Maxine Bryant. I am the director of the Georgia Southern Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Center right here in beautiful Savannah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming out here today while we can history of the Gullah Geechee and also all of the spiritual aspects that we have come to love here in Savannah.
Okay, so let me first say that I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana, right? So I'm a long way from home. But when I came to Savannah and I became acquainted with the culture here, I became so enthralled. I became so excited about learning about African American history, about the African diaspora, about the Gullah Geechee culture.
An outsider from the culture coming in with a very high bias towards being African, being placed over the Cultural Heritage Center for the Geechee people. Now, Lorenzo Dal Turner never even visited Africa until after his Africanisms of the Gullah dialect book. So you gotta wonder, where did he get the information or learn about the Africanisms that he found within the Geechee people? Coming into the newspapers, you'll find an article about how he received a grant. Coming in closer, it says that he did field work on the Gullah dialect of the Sea Islands of Georgia and South Carolina on grants from the American Council of Learned Societies. And it also shows he received grants from the Rosenwald firm and the American Philosophical Society. A grant just means you were paid to do this study. He got money for it. Plain and simple. Looking at this, he did research in French West African languages in Paris, France. He did his learning of about Africans in France, in Paris, France, not in Africa. And he tells you in his own book, in the Africanisms of the Gullah dialect, it shows that Professor Henry Labouré made it possible for me to interview at length more than 20 natives of French West Africa. He didn't go to Africa, he went to Paris and spoke to some Africans. Also within his book, with him talking about dealing with a corrupt Melville Herskovich, it comes in and says, to the Humanities Institute of Fisk University, I am indebted for a grant in aid. He was getting grants all over the place. He didn't write this book for free just because he was interested in Gullah people, Geechee people, Yuchi people. He was paid to make this book. And his book being one of the first few times that the words Gullah and Geechee are ever put together. Again, this was in the mid 1900s, the first time these words ever get put together.
Even the words Gullah and Geechee were close to the names of the ethnic groups found in Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia, the Gullah and the Geechee. River from Bunce. The village leaders of Tasso Island gather. In 1978, at a similar gathering, the chief, Pabessa Raka, asked Opala to tell his people what happened to the slaves, to fill in a 200-year gap in history.
So I agree.
Oh, Ben.
So the people being calm, I tell them what the slaves. I tell them, say they've been taking the slaves go America. And I tell them, say, they no die.
In many ways, this was the beginning of Opala's quest. These people of Tasso had always known Bunce Island to be a slave port, but of the slaves' fate, they knew nothing. Some thought they were taken north to Europe, where they died of the cold, or that they were fattened up like cattle to be eaten. Opala told them what he knew and promised to find out more.
Now, I just want to explain what you just seen. What you seen was Joseph Opala speaking to a group of Africans. Now, these Africans need an interpreter. So Joseph Opala gets a man to interpret what he's saying to them. Now, as Joseph Opala gets them to interpret it, he changes the way he speaks, and he starts to speak with a broken English patois. He's speaking like a Bahamian, like a Jamaican. He's saying, I take them the slaves me go to America. Why wouldn't he just speak it the normal way? Because you need a translator, an African translator, that is, to translate this back to the people. So changing your accent isn't gonna help the people learn any further what you're saying, right? But this is a chance for Joseph Opala to display his Gullah speech skills. He wants you to know that he can speak like the people. He's just like the Gullah people in his eyes.
Agree.
Oh, Ben.
So the people being calm, I tell them what the slaves. I tell them, say they've been taking the slaves go America. And I tell them, say, they no die.
And it's pretty sinister. It's pretty sinister because what helps to spread propaganda is capital, money in your hand. And what was done in the mid to early 1950s, and that money was given for propaganda through a grant given by Jim Clyburn not long ago, which there was $10 million allocated to preserve the Gullah Geechee cultural heritage. Not any money going to preserve the Yuchis, the Yamasis, the Wackamas, the Distos, and the rest of them that's down there without going through them, the Wale Indians and the rest. No, even though there are Wale preservations and signs out there that will show you that the Wale existed, then this is where they were. They're not trying to spend $10 million to preserve that. They want the $10 million to preserve the propaganda of the Gullah Geechee instead. Because it's people like a Jim Clyburn who wants to be the one to preserve this so-called Gullah Geechee heritage. He's the main one that signed the deal for the $10 million grant in order to preserve the Gullah Geechee cultural heritage corridor. And that's the information that they're trying to push out as propaganda for the people out there. But they're not trying to spend $10 million to preserve the Wale tribe. They're not spending $10 million to preserve the Yuchi tribe. They're not spending $10 million to preserve any of the Aboriginal tribes within that coast. No, Jim Clyburn wants to spend $10 million to remember the Gullah people, and he puts Gullah in front of Geechee. Isn't that funny? And the Wale literally have signs to preserve their history, but at the same time, it's not really that much. But it is also still listed in the Gullah Geechee corridor. And when you look at the word Gullah and how it was used prior, it was literally used to make fun of you. These people would take what the way that people talk, which was a Bahamian dialect, almost sounds Jamaican or whatever, right? They would take and make fun of that language and call it a Gullah dialect. Now, then they would make songs, make whole albums, acting like they're Gullah people. You got white folks sitting there acting like they're speaking Gullah, and there's people in the audience laughing as if it's some stand-up comedy.
He might overrun the law, but Tucker done a take acorn on it one oak tree when the fox bust out the brush and make but Tucker fly up in the tree for save himself. The fox make like he eat the acorn and he chomp him out and he say, but Tucker, this should be the sweetest acorn I ever tasted in my life. You best come down taste some. But Tucker tell him say him they want no more. He don't have all he does want. The fox then tell but Tucker say, but Tucker, you ain't yet about the new law done passed? But Tucker tell him say ain't no yet about.
See, the first Gullah tales were told by white folks. Then eventually it got to the point to where they're telling it while showing you visuals of black people, making you think it's the black people who's telling it, like this here.
I know exactly. I know I've been doing man's work and first gun shoot. I was born a slave. I remember getting flogged till I couldn't stand it no more. Then I run off into the bush. Then the soldier come and Marshal Lincoln make me free. I see a heap of trouble on the island after that, too. I see the big wind come.
And now that the propaganda has set in for a couple of generations, you have current modern people thinking that the stories must have been true, repeating Gullah stories in order to seem like it's something really connected with their own culture, when originally the Gullah storytelling was something to make fun of them.
Almost everybody that lived on this island were enslaved Africans, all Gullah people.
And the island, they had nothing but plantation. And they calling the white gold, you know. The cotton and the rice and all the indigo.
The enslaved Africans had to find a way to communicate. So it was just another day in the life of a little Gullah girl.
To walk and the binya on these hallowed and sacred grounds on this place we call Edisto Island.
That island's name, Edisto, is one of those names of Indian tribes that are supposed to be extinct.
Where I grew up.
Almost everybody that lived on this island were enslaved.
That's the power of propaganda. Now listen here, we're going to go back to how Gullah storytelling really started, which was almost like a stand-up comedy thing, but not really. Just listen.
Thank you very much. I'm glad of this opportunity to talk to you on a subject in which I've been very much interested for a long, long time. Perhaps the most effective way to illustrate any subject is to tell a humorous story, and that's what I attempt to do in my effort to keep alive the most fascinating and distinctive of all of our American dialects, Gullah. Gullah was the dialect or the patois of a primitive people who lived on the plantations in lower South Carolina and Georgia. Like all of our dialects, it's rapidly dying out due to widespread communication and education. I've had a lot of pleasure in trying to keep it alive, and this discourse is in line with that effort. My friends in the Charleston area, white and black, realize, I feel sure, that I'm not trying to ridicule any race of people when I tell Gullah stories. I'd like to emphasize that fact, that I'm not ridiculing any race of people. I hope all those who listen will lend a sympathetic ear and will understand what I'm trying to do and perhaps be amused.
Before we let him get to his bit, I want you to notice there that he said that he has black friends who are Gullah, so this means he's not making fun of you. Why would he have to emphasize that if he's not making fun of you? Like I said, Gullah was used to make fun of you.
During World War II, a high-ranking civil servant in the British Ministry of Transportation was sent down to the China, Burma, India area on a transportation problem. He wasn't familiar with the uniforms of the Allied forces, and he came in contact with a black soldier from Edisto Island, South Carolina, and he said, "Old top, are you Indo-Chinese?" And at that moment, the Englishman was introduced to the Gullah dialect when he heard this reply, "No, sir, boss, I's a out-American."
Keep in mind, the punchline of his joke was the Gullah language he tried to replicate.
I couldn't help but be reminded of a story of a fellow Charlestonian, a man of color, who left Charleston and went down to New Orleans. He got into some difficulty down there, and he wanted to get away from the place as quickly and as quietly as he could. He got himself a rowboat and started rowing up the Mississippi. The stream was strong against him, and he made no progress, but he rowed all day and all night. And crack of dawn next morning, he was still rowing, but still about in the same spot, when an acquaintance standing on the levee recognized him out in the stream and hailed him, "Hello, Sam." The oarsman turned in great astonishment, saying, "Gracious God, who that know me way up in Minneapolis?"
Now you have to ask the question, why would the people take on a name that was given to them to make fun of them in the first place? That's because they don't know that. They don't know that the name came from that. They're going off of modern sources. And when you go off of modern sources, these sources are just like, this is the Gullah people that came from Angola, and it was a fun time leaving from Africa to here, and blah, 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 and they have cultural practice. That's completely bull crap. Okay? These people were forced given this name through propaganda, not necessarily forced on them per se, like you must take this name, but the propaganda is what forced it on them. Now, especially when you force that rhetoric to the young people in the that's coming up in the area. When you put that stuff in schools and in literature and stuff, and you have all this Gullah Geechee stuff, those people grow up thinking that that's what it really was, and they're not looking past the sources that taught it to them in the first place. And it's very sinister because there's lots of documentaries about this. These people have been spending lots of this grant money, making trips over to Africa, trying to make these connections on purpose. Okay, so what you have here is a song that was supposedly recorded by Lorenzo Dal Turner and by a lady that was a Geechee lady. Well, you get people like Opala who takes that song over to Africa and act like they're trying to figure out if they could find somebody who knows this song, and then they act like they found somebody who can sing the same song in a remote tribe out there. And then what they do is they try to connect the two together. And most people will sit here and mention these things. Oh, there's Africanism. Don't you know about the song? Don't you know about this? But have you ever actually heard the songs together? Have you watched the documentary? In fact, let me show you what that looked like and what it sounded like. You let me know if both of these are sounding exactly the same as they sing them.
Specific connection to Sierra Leone required more exacting proof. The woman Turner found singing this song didn't know what the words meant. But to Turner, the meaning was clear.
An anthropologist, a ethnomusicologist, and a linguist looking for this song. And in 1990, we got into a car and we went all around Mende country playing the song in each village we came to. They have the African face, they are black people, but they don't know where they're from.
We sat down with people mostly older people who might still remember, and we heard long tales of their past. But each time we played the song, we couldn't find anyone who really recognized it. They would recognize one or two Mende words, but never the song.
We were disappointed. Village after village after village, people said, well, yes, there's Mende in that song, but we don't know that particular song.
After covering the entire Pujun district, the tired and disappointed researchers began to think the song was lost forever and decided to call off their search. However, some weeks later, Cynthia Schmidt took up her tape recorder once again and decided to try her luck in Gullah, a small village they hadn't visited before because it was just outside the borders of Pujun district.
Now they're acting like this current documentary is having a hard time finding where to go to figure out who it was that made this song. And then they go to a Ngola later. But isn't Gola or Ngola exactly where the last documentary said that they found these people?
That evening we sat down with the tape recorder and I explained the story to them, and they were listening with complete attention, very, very carefully. And as I began to play the recording, to my astonishment, these women began to sing along. And one woman in particular, her name was Bindu Jabati, the head woman.
Now, mind you, this is supposed to be the first raw time they recorded these people repeating the song, because they supposedly heard them play the song and now they're singing it as if they know it. But listen, please listen to the song again and tell me if you hear it being exactly the same.
kamulo makabe yalo mamuya. Awaka 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 kamulo makabe yalo mamuya.
No, they are not similar. In fact, what they'll try to do is play on your ability to want to give grace to a more primitive style of a song, or maybe changes that you might feel like you think you hear. But there are no coincidental similarities within these two people's songs.
She sang along with the first phrase, Awaka Maloma, which means everybody come, everyone come together. Kambe yale. The grave is restless. The grave is not yet at peace. And this was the same meaning as the same song that we heard recorded in 1931 by Lorenzo Turner. So I asked her to talk about the song. This was an extraordinary moment for me. I asked her to talk about it, and she said that she had learned it from her grandmother. One day she had asked her grandmother about the song. What is that song that you're singing? And the grandmother said, this is a song that I remember our ancestors by. This is the song that I sing to remember my late husband, to remember my mother, to remember my father. And she said that that song was a song that they sang at their burials, and that was associated with a very, very important ceremony. And this ceremony was very special to Mendi people because it connected them with their ancestors. It was a song that they sang to bridge the world of the living and the world of those who had gone before them.
Awaka mona kambaya lele kwambe awaka mona kambaya lele.
Now, what you have here are the descendants of Amelia Dawley. Now, they have a strong oral history of passing down this song, and they're actually singing it here in Africa. Imagine the grant money spent to get them there. But here they are trying to sing it for them to see if they can get the connection. Now, the documentary is going to make it a connection regardless of whether you think it is one or not. But listen for yourself and judge.
Awaka mona kambaya lele kwambe awaka mona kambaya lele when has the will go see how you quenda ya has the will go dwell in the quaint has the will go see how you banga lily has the will go dwell in the quaint. Awaka kamulo makabe yalo mamuya. 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 Awaka kamulo makabe yalo mamuya.
And this is how you Africanize an Indian culture, utilizing grant funds to send archaeologists like Joseph Opala, who claims to be the archaeologist, and an ethnomusicologist out to an African country, make fake connections, and have a people of primitive nature recreate something that was never even there to begin with. That song by Amelia Dolly had nothing to do with anything African.
The name of this ceremony, Tenjami, crossing the water, is a familiar concept to Gullah people.
A lot of people are going to try to get you to believe that these Geechee people are Gullahs. You know, like basically there's books out there written in modern times where they drop the Geechee part and only have Gullah. They call themselves a Gullah African American, a Gullah American, and that's literally erasure. Now, some people will say the Geechees and Gullah are supposed to be completely different people to a degree because they say the people that know that they have some African ancestry will call themselves Gullah, but that's just another way for them to try to get people to accept that term, and over time they're going to push out the Geechee term.
Darius Brown, you're on mute.
Hey, how's everybody? I'm Darius Brown. I'm from Beaufort, South Carolina. All my family's from the Low Country. I'm a research assistant for the Center of Family History, and I'm excited to be here today.
We are so glad.
They love to pick young people like this Darius Brown to write new propaganda books. Yes, he is a college graduate. He's been a so-called genealogist for a total of about 6 years. Most of that 6 years would have been during his school years, likely. But this is the person they're going to have put out a new book, which will be the furthering of the propaganda of the story of erasing the people and calling these people Gullahs. And notice here, you only see the term Gullah African Americans. You don't even see the word Geechee anymore. And Darius tries to explain this, that he found his ancestor as a name Musa as listed here on a plantation. Yet when you come to look in at the word, it's very undiscernible. And I don't even know how, because even ChatGPT couldn't figure out what that name said, but they said it says Musa, which is an African name. And he's going with this story as if he found the African that he needed to find to call himself a Gullah. And now he has a whole book that's going to be the future literature in calling these people Gullahs. And they're going to go with it just like they did the book from Lorenzo Dow Turner. Now, I'm not saying no Africans ever came into this area. When you look, and I'll show you some sources, there are going to be sources that show some Africans came into the area. But do those Africans outnumber the amount of Indians that were still in the area? Not by a long shot. And if you can find any of these Africans through some of these actual documents that actually ties to your genealogical paperwork, then yeah, you can, if you really want to, go ahead and name yourself the term Gullah. Maybe your people do come from Angola, but to actually utilize that term to blanket an entire group of people with verifiable genealogical ancestry to Indian tribes who are known to either be still here today or extinct, but the people are still here and they can tie themselves through paperwork to these tribes, then that means you're trying to erase those people. And we're not saying that no Africans showed up on these shores. I can show you a few different articles and different sources that say that some Africans possibly came upon these shores within those years. But at the same time, how many Africans does it take to erase an Indian tribe? Was the Indian tribe completely gone before the Africans came? Likely not. But that's what they want you to believe. And here is an actual account book from Austin and Lauren, and it actually shows some Africans coming here from the Gambia region. But the actual numbers listed of Africans that came is very, very minor.
From the mid-1730s to about 1790, I've been able to document 139 vessels that had human cargo on board. Of that, 92 of them we know for a fact docked at Brunswick. A total of about 969 enslaved persons were brought into the Cape Fear. 760 some disembarked at Brunswick, but roughly 650 of those we believe actually this would have been the point of disembarkation, the first time they would have stepped on North American continent since leaving Africa.
You heard that right. This man just said 650 Africans was what he had on record.
Were brought into the Cape Fear. 760 some disembarked at Brunswick, but roughly 650 of those, we believe, actually this would have been the point of disembarkation, the first time they would have stepped on North American continent since leaving Africa. Okay, the Gullah Geechee corridor runs from Jacksonville, North Carolina down to Jacksonville, Florida, and I want to say about 30 miles in.
And the $10 million given to preserve the Gullah Geechee cultural heritage is what is the main thing being utilized for that, because these people are being paid. Opala didn't go over to Africa for free. Queen Quet isn't going around doing this stuff for free. The other people who are at the heads of these museums down there in low country, they're not doing this for free. They're doing this for part of that grant money. Now the grant money at this point has ran out, but then there's donations. The grant money gets you started. Donations keep you going. And in fact, Geechee is not necessarily listed as a tribe, nor is Gullah. When you go and look at all of the Indian tribes, whether they be extinct or not extinct, you will not see the term Geechee. You will not see the term Gullah. That's because all of those Indians in that area were completely different names. Yuchi, Wale, Yamasi, Whack-a-Mole. And like I've said before, these things are listed. These things are what people in that area can still tie themselves to via paperwork, or also not only just via paperwork, some of their parents list these Indian names, list these tribal names. And you got to think, are these people lying? That's one thing to say that you're part of a very known, prominent 5 civilized tribe, but to actually have a grandparent that will actually say, no, I'm a Yamasee Indian, or I'm a Yuchi Indian, and these things were known to be extinct, that's the strength of their oral statement. Because we have people within our communities that can still tie their ancestry and their genealogical records back to tribal names that were known to be extinct according to certain sources. But these tribal names were still listed on many prominent maps that list Indian tribes. So are these people extinct, or are they still here? Well, when you look at the actual government archives, and it's going to show you that you can still see some of these people like Wale, and they were a mound building people. You got the Timucuas, you got the Yamasi. They say they disappeared in records, but you also have the Yuchis listed here. One thing you don't have is a Geechee tribe, because it was never a tribe. Now we're going to have to do a lot in order to continue to stop the madness of the propagandizing of the Indians in many different areas. And there's many other things in this documentary, and there's many other things in these documentaries that I got to show you that are completely asinine, completely made up. Okay, and there's no other way to put it. These people are trying to force a narrative, an African narrative, on an Indian people, and a lot of people start to accept it over time, based upon the fact that they think their skin tone, based upon the fact that they think their skin tone has something to do with where they come from, and that is far from the case. And I'm really disappointed in the leaders like Queen Quet, because she's completely running with the story, changing it up as it goes. These are the Geechee people instead of Geechee. It's really hard for me to believe that a person that's supposed to be the queen of a tribe, or of a people, supposedly, and this queen knows that the Geechee River exists, knows that everybody's been living by that or somewhere near that vicinity, calling themselves Geechee, but to sit here and say that the word comes from somewhere else, it shows malice. It shows that she's willing to go along with the plan in order to propagandize you that this is something African and not something completely American.